Hi everyone, welcome. The system that you see here in front of us is the bag that used to reside outside in my yard up until 4 weeks ago. It was 4 weeks ago that I bought the system inside. It was prior to a cold spell that was expected to roll through my area. And in the interest of allowing the worms to remain comfortable and warm and perhaps most importantly productive, continuing to work down the materials in their system, I decided it was time to bring them indoors, down here into my wormery, which is just a room in my basement, where I don't have any heat, but it is warmer than outside. That's for sure. And hopefully by doing so, I've given them an environment that's going to allow for a little bit more productivity than if they were left outside just trying to protect themselves from freezing. And then after the initial move 4 weeks ago, bringing them inside, I left the system to just sit for 2 weeks, but in such a way that that colorful plywood covering that was on here, that was propped up, kind of pinned in here inside the bag to allow for some airflow underneath it, in the hopes that we would allow the system to shed a little bit of its moisture. This thing was very, very heavy when I carried it downstairs, but it's definitely lost some of its weight, presumably to evaporation. And when we last came in here 2 weeks ago, at which point the system had reached its 300th day in service, we decided that the system seemed crumbly and loose and good enough that we probably didn't need to allow for any more drying from evaporation. So that's the reason I had placed that plywood cover right back onto the surface of the material here, so that we can just maintain the moisture level that we observed in here last time 2 weeks ago. You can see there's all kinds of stuff in here. There's little leftover bits of food. I don't know what this is, but based on its color, it might just be a chunk of pumpkin or something. And there's all kinds of leaves in here. Lots of residual bedding materials. So I've been really trying to gear the feedings in such a way that the material that they get was all small particle-sized foods over the past couple check-ins since they've been down here in my basement. So that really translated into coffee and this stuff here, my worm chow. This is a new batch. If you were with me during the last feeding, we pretty much almost tapped out my supply of worm chow during that feeding. I mean, I might have left a tiny little bit. Perhaps that could be used in one other feeding elsewhere. I might have even just gone straight ahead and prepared a fresh batch after that and not even used that tiny residual amount that I left last time. So we've got a fresh batch here. And this batch actually consists of a good bit of leafy matter. A lot of pumpkin seeds in here, but also a good bit of just leaves included in the batch. Thrown into the blender, pulverized to a nice powdery consistency. I definitely like the way things crumble in here. Here and there I could see a pumpkin seed. I keep bumping into them, so I must have fed some pumpkin in here once upon a time, where I just threw in the seeds too. And I think those are the sorts of things that just don't break down very quickly unless they're helped along a little bit. So my idea today was, since I don't have any coffee to give them today, I just thought we would give them the worm chow as they're feeding. All I really did with that stuff was I just applied it and blended it into the surrounding materials, and I thought we'd do something similar today. Another thing that we did, though, was we did collect any sort of large particle food matter that we bumped into along the way as we were tilling through, and we assembled a little collection of that stuff, which was plopped down into the center of the container. And in a way, they sort of got a feeding of all these old bits and pieces of corn cob and the shell of a mango seed and all kinds of other things that we found as we inspected the material. So I'm sure we'll still find other similar things like that out here as we check out how things are looking but the majority of it, I would have to imagine, is still right down the middle. Like here's another chunk of corn cob. I suppose we can do the same as we did last time, is kind of do a quick till around the edges to see how things look. And if we find any more large chunks, we'll just gather them up into a little collection, which we can add to what's already still going to be down there. It was a good bit of stuff, so after the past 2 weeks since the last time we checked in, it's pretty likely that there's still going to be a lot of that remaining. But I thought we would just go around the outer edges and get a read on how the material looks. And another thing that I always like to gauge is how the worms are feeling about the material by, either being in it or not being in it. And what I'm observing here, just from kind of making my way around, is that the worms do seem okay with this stuff just by being in it all the way around, which is a relief. Even though the material that this bag is made out of is a fairly breathable fabric, it's got a little bit of help because it's a double bag, but that's not really what's doing the main prevention of moisture loss. It's the little liner of plastic bag that I placed in between this inner bag and the outer bag. You can even hear it crumbling a little bit as I touch it. All the way around there's some plastic in here, which is helping the system hang on to its moisture content rather than it being lost to evaporation around the edges, making for a pretty comfortable environment for the worms to be in. I am glad to see that the moisture level in here is still quite nice. So during those first 2 weeks that we had the system in here with perhaps only that newspaper covering that was on here, protecting it against, I guess, I don't know, I just like to have some sort of a cover. I don't even know what I'm protecting against. But it did allow for a good bit of evaporation, I believe, so I like having some sort of a cover on the material. I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem if I just left it uncovered, but then it would probably dry a lot more quickly, and then even the surface would get a little bit dry. Here we've got a worm that's made itself at home under one of the loops of this fabric, and impatient me, sometimes I'm like, get out of there, and I tug on the little guy and I end up tearing the poor little worm in half. So I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to let them be if they're like that. I mean, naturally, if it seems like getting them out is an easy enough thing, I'll just do it. But if they're really in there, it's probably best just to leave them in there, and if they want to come out, let them come out. But tugging on them is most likely going to result in a torn worm. So let's make our way down into the middle. I am curious to see how all that leftover food scrap that we collected last time is looking, and whether or not it's attracting worms to it. It does seem like they're kind of hanging out in the middle, and in the middle it might even be where you would find even more moisture than elsewhere within the system. So that might also explain why we've got a good number of worms hanging out down here in the middle. I mean, that's not to say we didn't see a good number of worms elsewhere in the system. There did seem to be a nice even population of worms everywhere, and that might just be because of the way we applied the worm chow and coffee that they got last time by blending it in everywhere all the way around. And I'm not even sure how much further we need to go as far as excavating the last feeding zone. I'm just curious to see what other types of leftovers I'm able to find as I go along. Last time I applied quite a bit of coffee. It might have been almost like an entire carton. And I don't have any of that today. I've only got a little bit of my worm chow, and I really didn't even want to go too overboard putting that stuff in today either. I guess what I'd really like to see is that the worms are kind of working down the residual leftover bits of leafy matter and other materials in here that they could utilize as a food source. rather than me giving them fresh stuff. But as long as I'm in here, it does always seem like it might be a good idea to just give them a little fresh food. Kind of helps me too, you know, make whatchamacallit, do away with some of the stuff that I'm attempting to do away with, get composted. So I think that little bit that I blended in around the edges, and now this little bit that I'm gonna also blend in, is going to be the extent of what they're going to get fed. And I suppose as part of blending it in, we can also backfill the hole. See if I've forgotten any of these large chunks of corn cob or any other stuff that we thought might be nice to throw back down into the middle. And I think we're just going to let the system continue the way it's been. Luckily the covers are keeping things nice and comfortable in here. That first 2 weeks indoors with really meager top coverings allowed for a good bit of the excess moisture to leave, and then we've been managing pretty well with hanging on to the remaining moisture in the system so that the worms are comfortable in it everywhere. And I guess we're just going to continue. So yeah, I am counting. This is, I think, feeding number 28 now. I think the system had been fed 27 times up until now. And it does seem like these 2-week intervals is plenty. No need to come back in here any more frequently than this. And I've even thought about possibly relocating them out of this large bag, possibly into one of my bus bins. But luckily working in here is not too difficult, so maybe they'll just stay. I don't know. I gotta start thinking about what to do with these little guys. It would be nice to try to harvest their castings and get them started into a nice fresh environment. So maybe that'll be in the cards one of these days. But for now, that's it. That's it for the check-in. And yeah, this poor top covering is still somehow holding together with just a few tiny pieces of wood, but I think it's only a matter of time before it officially splits into 2 pieces. Alright everyone, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.